Okay, thank you, Boris, and hello, everybody. How are you today? How was lunch? Great? Did you eat? Because if you ate, probably you will go fall asleep in 20, 30 minutes. So I'm trying to be very, very positive and make you feel comfortable to fall asleep. No, really. Today, the talk that I'm going to talk about is about Redux. But before I'm going to start about Redux, let's talk about single-page applications. Okay, single-page applications or SPAs are very complex. When you start creating your SPA, you start with a small application, 2, 3 components, a service, and then, okay, the clicker is not working. Yeah. Okay. And then, after you start developing the single-page application, it gets a little bit more tangled with data binding and everything else. And everything else, and it starts to grow up. Let's ditch this. And grow up, and grow up, and grow up. And everything is tangled, one component to another, and to a service, or to pipes, and everything else. And your data flow, you start to change a small thing, and yeah. Boom! We change something and the application explodes. No, it's not going to explode, but the application is breaking because one change in one point of your application will go to another point because of data binding and everything else, and it will make the application malfunction or do something strange in your application. So what can we do? This is why I'm going to talk about Redux. But before Redux, let's talk about who is standing here. So I'm Gil Fink, as Boris said. I'm Spark's CEO, and I'm a senior consultant. I'm a Microsoft MVP, Most Valuable Professional in the last 8 years. It's an award. It's not something that you do tests to get that award. I wrote a book called Pro Single Page Application Development in A-Press, and you can buy it in Amazon. I wrote 4 Microsoft official courses in HTML5 programming and Windows 8 and Windows Store apps. I can't say that. I'm also running the GDG Rishon LeZion meetup, and I'm one of the organizers of this conference of AngularUP. What we're going to do in the next 27 minutes is I'm going to talk about the Redux pattern, what is the Redux pattern, and then I'm going to explain to you how you can combine Redux and Angular to create your data flow. Then I'm going to present a library called ng2Redux and explain how to use it. Why I'm using that library? Because in the next, there is another session here by Tero that is going to talk about another library, which I will mention later on. And I decided that I'm going to talk about a different library, so you won't see 2 libraries, the same libraries later on. So I presented the SPA problem, and probably you know that because you're a web developer and you created single-page application. Yes or no? Yes. And you know that problem that you change something and you break everything. So there are solutions for that. For example, CQRS or event sourcing. Who heard about Flux? Raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. So in this session, I'm going to talk about Redux. And Redux is based on Flux, but it's not Flux. Okay? Flux has different principles and different things in it. And then Redux, and Redux is a pattern. It's a data flow pattern. And in its whole, it's a predictable state management container for your application. So you don't need Angular for it. You can run it in any application that you are building. It's suitable for component-driven frameworks like Angular and React. Redux has 3 different principles. The first principle in Redux is a single source of truth. What is single source of truth? You have only one application state, and it's an object tree that you are going to use all your state in your application inside of one object. Who think about God object, like the source of truth? Yeah, it is something like that, but it's more efficient and more interesting, and we'll talk about it later on. So we have a state that is a store that handles all the application state for you. The second principle of Redux is state is read-only. That means that in order to change something in the state, you need to emit an action. That action will describe what is happening, and then using that action, Redux will understand how to mutate your store and move it from one state to another. Not by changing something in the state, but rather creating a new state for you. It's not mutation, state is read-only. The third principle is changes are made with pure function. What is a pure function? A pure function is a function that gets input and output, and you get output from it, and it doesn't mutate the inputs. So for example, in this slide, you can see a reducer. A reducer is the name for pure function that changes state in Redux. You see a reducer that gets some action and the current state and manipulate it and returns a different state, a new state for you. And as you can see in this slide, I'm not changing the current state. I'm just moving one step forward and creating another state which I'm going to use. So let's drill down. I said that Redux is a data flow pattern. How it works. So we have 4 different actors in Redux. We have the view, an action creator, the store, and reducers. In the view, you have interaction from the users. So some user clicks something or move the mouse or anything else, and that interaction creates a new action using an action creator. That action is dispatched to the store, okay? And that action can also include some payroll or something like that that you're going to change later on. So the store uses a reducer, gives it its previous state and the action that it got, and returns a new state for you. Then it updates or sends a signal to all the views, hey, something changed in the store, please update the whole view. You have a unidirectional flow. No two-way binding, nothing like that. And this helps you not to break your application because you always know what is the current state, and if you go forward to a different state, you always can return to the previous state. So if you need to do something like undo or redo or things like that, it's very, very simple to do it in Redux. More than that, we have a lot of other actors that can do something. For example, outside action. We have push notification, timers, and things like that. And these things can create their own actions and get into the unidirectional data flow. So it's very simple as well. Everything goes one way, and you send events up the chain until the store, and data flows down. That's all. That's Redux in 3 principles and 1 diagram. But Redux as implementation is a library that was written by Dan Abramov, and it is a very small and compact library. It includes 5 different functions or API functions like create store that gets a reducer and create your store, combine reducers that can combine 2 reducers so you don't need to create a big, huge switch case reducer or something like that. You can combine small pieces of reducers. And of course, there is the apply middleware. I'm not going to talk about middlewares in this talk, but please, after this talk, go and learn about what are middlewares. It's a way to plug into Redux flow some things that do something along the way of the unidirectional flow. You have store APIs, for example, that helps you to dispatch the actions or get the state from the store. And I urge you not to change the state that you get from the store, and don't do that. Just use it as a read-only state. And with that, let's stop talking and let's start coding, okay? So I'm going to open, not this. I'm going to open my WebStorm, and inside of WebStorm here, we have a small application. All I did is I created a dependency on Redux, okay? I did npm install, not to use the hotel's Wi-Fi to do that live, okay? And hopefully wait until the library is downloaded or things like that. So I created that beforehand. And we have here an index.ts. It's going to be written in TypeScript. So if you've been to Daniel's session in the morning, TypeScript is a language that compiles into JavaScript. And now I'm going to create my first action. So let's create the action here, okay? So I'm going to import from Redux library an action only to have that type. And I'm creating a new class, which is going to be the default export here. I'm calling it counter actions. In this class, I have two different actions, increment and decrement, and two functions, increment and decrement, that returns an action. That action is going to have a type, and this action doesn't have any payload, okay? Only type. So we have our actions, and let's create reducer. So here's an example of a reducer. I import the actions from the counter action, and I export a function. A reducer is a pure function. It doesn't manipulate the state. It returns a new state. So for example, if the action that the reducer gets is type increment, I return the current state plus 1. If the action is decrement, I'm returning the current state minus 1. If I don't know what to do, I'm returning the state. Now I can create something. Let's create the store. Okay, create the store is as simple as using the create store function and give it the counter reducer. That's all. Then I create a new instance of my counter actions in order to do some fancy stuff like outputting some stuff into the console. Okay, it's not fancy at all. So you can see that I'm dispatching the increment, and decrement. And if I will run this application, let's do npm run test, what's going to be the result? 0, 1, 2, 1. Here it is. Yay! We use Redux. Okay, so we're in an Angular conference, and you didn't came to this session only to learn about Redux. You probably work with Angular. So what about Angular? So as I said, Redux is a design pattern. It's a data flow pattern. So you can apply Redux into Angular applications. Even in Angular 1, you can do that. In Angular 2, there are two major libraries that helps you to do that with the Redux library. First is the NGRX store that Rob Wormhole from the Angular team wrote. And the second is ng2-redux. As I said, Terry is going to talk about NGRX store, so I'm going to talk about ng2-redux. So you can download it from its GitHub, okay? And then once you have the ng2-redux in your application, what you're going to do is to import the ng-redux module into your ng module. And then you create the store and wire it to ng-redux. That's all. Once you did those two things, you get to use two simple options. One is the decorator select that helps you to select data or state from the store. And all the state returned from the store is observables. And the second one is dispatch. You can dispatch actions. And now, with this data or with this information, you can create applications with Angular 2 and Redux together. So let's take a look at an Angular application with no Redux. Here's an application. Let's run it. ng-serve. Who've been to Tracy's session? So I'm using Angular CLI here in order to run my server, and it takes a little bit. Let's just open the browser on localhost. And let's see the application in action. And my computer wants to die right now. Don't know why. Okay, so we have a grocery store. My wife always sends me to the grocery to buy things, and I always forget some stuff. So I created a small application that enables me to add something to my list. Let's create these letters, and you can see here a log that prints out what I'm doing. I can change the state of the grocery items. I can remove items from the list. I can even really change the backlog in order to erase some stuff. Okay, this is a really simple create, update, delete application. Okay, and it was created with Angular 2 without, okay, where am I? Without any Redux. So if I'm taking a look at the HTML file that I have here, you can see here all the data binding that I have, for example, for grocery items. And in the application itself, the component, I just created some instances of arrays, and I'm using those arrays. And we have two-way binding in the application, and everything works, and that's fine. But you probably want to see how we can apply Redux into this application. So I created a new instance of this application using ng2Redux. Okay? So I fetched the ng2Redux library. And as I said, the first thing that you will probably want to do in order to use ng2Redux is to import the ng-Redux model. And then to put it in the ng-model import list. Okay, so here is the ng-Redux model. In the application itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import, or sorry, not import, but use the ng-Redux object, give it a state. Later on, I'll show you the state, and then configure the store to the root reducer. What is the root reducer? You will be able to find it here under index. Okay, let's go to there. And it just combined two reducers. One is the grocery item reducer, and the other one is log data reducer. Okay? And I have an object which is the application state. It includes the grocery item and the log data. Okay? This is the combination of two reducers. And if you want to take a look at a reducer, this is a reducer for the grocery items, the list that you can see with all the items. And you can see that it gets three different types of actions. One is add item, and that I spread my state, my current state, and add the new item. One is remove item. I get an index, and then I spread the array up until the index, and later on omit the next index. And check item that creates a double or a copy of my current item, and just toggle the did both parameter or property. That's all. And then what I can do here is just create some very not sophisticated, but very simple to create the objects or components. Okay. For example, here's the grocery list component. Let's take a look at the grocery list component previously. Okay, here it is. before we are using Redux. So we have here as inputs the grocery items and the log data, and we have some delete function and check item that toggle the did both property, and et cetera, et cetera. And if I'm taking a look at this here, what I'm having here is a selection using the select decorator of the grocery item from the store. I'm getting an observable array. And then we don't have all the functions that we had here, like check item or delete here is much more simpler because we just remove an item by dispatching an event or log data here by dispatching an event. It's the same action creator like you saw in the first Redux example. Okay, so these things here helps you to create a more robust solution. Your data is very predictable, and the change here is not such a massive change. It's more like a change of thinking. This is what I always tell people that start with Redux. You need to change how you think about the application flow, because we are so regular to two-way binding and to tangle everything and couple everything. And here, we need to think how we dispatch events and which events you need to use or actions you need to use in order to manipulate the state, the current state. And what is the current state or the state of the application? We need to think about all the state before we start to implement our application. So using Redux is just using a new state of mind. And I can run the application, but it will give you the same output. It will give you the same output as the previous application, but with Redux. All the demos, okay, will be online, I hope, by tomorrow in my blog, and of course the slide deck, so you don't need to write anything, okay? So with that, let's summarize the session, okay? Redux is a data flow pattern. It helps you to create a flow of data which is simpler than what we are having when we are doing coupling between components and services and everything else. It reduces the complexity when you are building single-page applications. When you want to use it in Angular or React or any other library, it can be used because it's a data flow pattern, okay? So I won't say it's simple to use it, but what I'm saying is that you can use it. I will put the resources slide after I finish the session in order to you to picture it if you want. And with that, I want to thank you. Use Redux today to make your application data flow simpler tomorrow. And if you have any questions, come to me after the session. I will be in the NG Zula and waiting for your questions. Thank you. Okay. So we have 4 minutes for questions. First question. There is a mic there. Yeah. You. What? Yeah. I didn't put two-way binding, but so the question was, can I show you how I did two-way binding in the application? So I didn't change. I removed, okay? This is a good question, okay? Because here, if I'm going to the HTML of the main component here, you have bindings, okay? This is no Redux, okay? In the Redux application, here, if I look at the app component HTML, you don't have binding because I'm selecting everything from the store using the select decorator, okay? So the binding disappears. Not all binding disappears, okay? But bindings for data inside of your application, when you use ng2 Redux, disappears. You can omit it. Okay? Okay, so come after the session. Yes? Okay, so what's the benefit between two-way binding and Redux? So less coupling. When you are using two-way binding, you are coupled between the component and the HTML, or the component and any other stuff, okay? And in Redux, you are not coupled because the store holds everything for you, okay? And the view is updated because I'm pushing a new state. That's all, okay? So this is a major pro for example, for Redux. But, and here's a big but, don't use Redux for everything. For simple page application or single page applications, don't use Redux. Okay, this demo shows you how to use Redux, but Redux can be very cumbersome in small applications. Redux more applies or more suitable for big applications and not for small applications because of its overhead and all the reducers, action, and everything else. Yes? Okay, so how do you handle forms and ng model? Didn't show that, but let's talk about it later on, okay? It's a long answer. Yeah, but I have 1 minute. Yes? Okay, so the answer, the question was in application that uses services, what fits to a service and what fits to the store. The state fits to the store. If you have the state of your application, it's the part of the store. The services are becoming more like something that fetch you the data and not store the data. The store is responsible to store all your data, okay? Reducer is just a pure function, okay, that manipulates the current state to a next state, okay? That's all. It's a function. It's nothing more than that. Okay, if you are talking about services against reducers, so a service gives you the opportunity to fetch some stuff and do some, I don't know, Ajax calls, timer, things like that. And in a reducer, you only change some input, not the input itself, but do operation on an input and get some output out of it. Based on the action that you got, yes. That's all. If, for example, you're asking about refresh, so in refresh, when you refresh the whole page, you get a new store with all the data in it. Okay? So again, thank you. Come after the session, and I'm here in the NG Zula for more questions about Redux or anything else. Thank you.